Welcome to London, everyone. It is Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to give you my response, reaction, whatever you want to call it, to the Tornado Cash incident that happened recently. I will kind of give some background on what it is for those of you who don't know, and then kind of my view on where things are going, etc. I've kind of echoed sort of a similar thing for, I don't know, a year and a half or something in terms of how I think it will ultimately play out. But that being said, you will find out in this video. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts on the whole incident. If you don't know about it, again, I'm going to explain it. I think it's important for people who care about kind of freedom, whether it is kind of freedom of speech, freedom of financial transacting, etc. It's a bad precedent, I would say, and also tells a little bit about where things are going. So for people who are in that environment, you can watch and we will dive in. Before we do, if you haven't, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for your support. If you would like help with internationalization of your life or your business, we can help you with the strategy. So figuring out what is the best solution to you, whether this is optimizing your global tax for your business or yourself personally, doing international banking, figuring out where the best places to relocate are, getting the residencies and the citizenships, etc., as well as the implementation of all that, putting it together, forming the companies, doing all of that. If you'd like help, you can reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message to offshorecitizen.net or through our website, offshorecitizen.net. Okay. So, what's the deal with Tornado Cash? So, first, quick background. So, Tornado Cash essentially was a way to have privacy in your transactions. And why this is important is because most blockchains, most crypto technology is a public ledger, okay, which means that everyone can see every transaction. This is really a serious problem for a lot of use cases, such as payments, right? If I go to the grocery store and I pay with Bitcoin or Ethereum or something like that, the fact that it will show a transaction, it won't just show, hey, you received X amount of Bitcoin, it will show where it came from, and you can follow that address back and you can see every transaction that that wallet has done, as well as the balance of the wallet, etc. Now, some people who are in certain Western privileged countries, say you live in Sweden or you live in something like this, might not understand the problem with this for a lot of the rest of the world, but if you're in Colombia or Russia or various other places, this could be kidnapping risk, this could be risk that somebody's going to physically assault you to try and get it, etc. So in general, I think it's important to recognize that privacy is an important part of life. Now, it may seem like, hey, we have no privacy today, and government surveillance, etc. That's a reality to some extent, and I don't think that we're going to get around. I don't think you're going to get to a point where you can escape the kind of government eye. However, I think there's a big difference between the NSA being able to surveil you and listening on your phone calls and things like this, and just everybody knowing about it. Now, there's some problems in certain third world countries where basically individuals can gain access to government information pretty easily. But in general, the situation is that the government is kind of overwhelmed with data. And so the likelihood that any individual person is being looked at is fairly small. Now, it doesn't mean that you necessarily want that or that, we should be supporting this. That's not the comment. But I think it's hard to get around a world where governments will attempt to do this. It is more reasonable to be in a world where the average people don't know. And so I always find, public disclosures of tax returns, etc., to be a little disconcerting, in part for those reasons. And in fact, I'll talk in some other videos about some bad situations that have happened recently to some people in certain parts of the world. So, stay tuned for those videos. So anyway, bottom line is blockchains, crypto, generally public, not always. We have things like Monero, Zcash, Secret Network, Oasis, etc. There are technologies that are trying to bring various amounts of privacy to that technology space, but generally the main networks are public. And so in order to prevent this, or not in order to prevent this, in order to make it so that somebody wouldn't be able to trace you back so easily, there was the creation of technology called mixers that came to exist in the world of Bitcoin. So there's things like Ninja Wallet, Samurai Wallet, which will basically kind of mix these UTXOs, as they're called, to create this, very difficult to follow chain. There have been various mixers for a lot of years. So the idea basically is you send tokens in there, and then they get mixed up through many, many, many transactions, broken up into pieces, put together, etc., and then on the other end come out, and it's really, really difficult to trace where they're from. Tornado Cash worked kind of in a similar way, mainly for Ethereum and I believe it was USDC. Or maybe, I can't remember what all currencies or whatever they had. But anyway, you would basically put your money in there, and a lot of people would put their money there in a fixed amount. So let's say everybody puts in $100, right? So they basically say, okay, all this money goes in $100, and then it spits out to separate wallets, and you can't tell whose money went where, right? Basically, we throw it all into this pot, and then spit out to a bunch of other pots, and whose money went where, nobody knows, right? It's impossible to trace that, or very difficult to trace it. And so this was used for privacy purposes. Vitalik mentioned he used it to donate to the people in Ukraine, and so that's an example. But it's used for a lot of cases. Now, what ended up going on was that the US government claimed that some North Korean, whatever you want to call them, terrorists. Terrorism is, a word that the government can throw around to mean anyone who they dislike, really. Let's be honest, terrorism is not a well-defined term. So anyway, some sort of people from North Korea is a sanctioned country, were using this, and essentially, whether it was money laundering or pulling stuff through. I believe there's a group called the Lazarus Group that was involved in a bunch of hacks in the crypto space. So one of the major ones, was it Ronin? Anyway, one of the big hacks, they'd stolen a bunch of money. And so a lot of the money that was being stolen from various protocols through various hacks was being filtered through Tornado Cash in order to go out the other side. And the idea was, this is kind of the public statement of it, is that the government wanted to cut off access of funds to the North Korean groups. And the idea is that one of the ways they do that is through sanctioning individuals, entities, in some cases specific property. And we'll talk about it in a second, but the idea is to kind of change the behavior, right? To provide some sort of a pressure around there. And so this is one of the tools. So anyway, what the US government ended up doing, something called OFAC, added Tornado Cash and the Tornado Cash addresses to this list of sanctioned entities. Essentially, the idea being that you're facilitating whether it's money laundering or violation of these rules, etc., and therefore no one who is a U.S. person or entity, it's illegal for them to do business with a Tornado Cash directly, and then essentially anyone who had transacted through Tornado Cash. And this led to a ripple of different effects. First of all, Circle, which is the company behind USDC, which is the second largest stablecoin, decided to freeze all of the balances in any of the wallets that were associated with Tornado Cash. So that was point number one. Point number two, a bunch of protocols such as Aave, Uniswap, etc., blocked those addresses from their front end. So you can still access them technically through the code because it's a permissionless system, but they blocked them accordingly. And this raised all kinds of issues and concerns and questions about kind of the censorship resistant nature, the decentralization of the system, etc., and how this would play out. So that's kind of the backdrop of what took place. And then to add on to all that, one of the Tornado Cash developers was arrested in Netherlands. And we're not exactly sure how that's going to play out. And it's not really totally clear that has something directly to do with this, or whether they did something else. But anyway, that will just kind of two separate issues. So sort of tied together, Tornado Cash gets sanctioned, and this person gets arrested. Okay. Now, oh, by the way, also Microsoft removed the Tornado Cash GitHub, and so that was another thing that took place. So anyway, bottom line is, kind of this broad corporate system-wide, American corporate system-wide attack on Tornado Cash. Now, this is a significant thing because Tornado Cash is a piece of software. It is a decentralized application running, and it is not an individual. So it would be, they'd never done this before. They'd never sanctioned a protocol or a piece of software. It would be a little bit like saying, okay, you're using Android to commit some crime, and we're going to sanction Android, right? That sort of thing, or Google Play Store, or whatever else. And frankly, you can kind of start taking some steps to say, well, hang on, terrorists are plotting something on WhatsApp. What happens if they go after WhatsApp, right? So there's this line of reasoning which is hard to argue with. Now, in the past, they had sanctioned a group that was facilitating Bitcoin tumbling, and in that case, you would actually send your money to them. So it wasn't just a piece of software; it was an actual group, so they could sanction it accordingly. You can kind of make that argument. So this was a big, unprecedented activity, and frankly a concerning one, because it affects the question of, okay, well, are software developers at risk for writing code? If you do, then this is a big problem in terms of kind of free and open production of software. There is court precedent in the US that states that software is speech, and therefore the government cannot restrict speech. So in theory, you can develop whatever software. Now, making money off that software would maybe be a little bit of a different thing, etc. And so we get into, for example, stuff with Napster, torrents, etc. So you have that side of it. And there can be a difference between operating something and actually kind of like creating it. So there's, again, some separations in these regards. But the bottom line is it's a little bit concerning. And it's also a little bit concerning to see how the government has influence which ripples to various big companies, right? Not surprising. Personally, I did not find any of this to be surprising. I find it disconcerting, but completely unsurprising. I think anyone who thought this sort of thing was not going to happen eventually was probably a little bit naive in that regard, because I think over time you're naturally going to have governments amp up what they're doing. And so, this could lead to them going after major miners. This could lead to them going after major validator operators, etc., to censor whatever, depending on what they decide. And so a good example of it is there was recently an announcement that Iran did their first $10 million crypto transaction, getting around sanctions. If you think that the US will simply allow countries like Iran, North Korea, etc., to circumvent their sanctions by using some sort of technology and roll over and do nothing about it, I think that's extremely naive. They will do something about it. The question is, what do they do and how successful are they at it? Those are kind of separate questions. So anyway, my first surprise on this was that there was not a more immediate legal response. I saw a great breakdown from the chief legal officer for Lido, which is a major staking company, and basically saying that this was a real problem and there's a legal case here, and yet no case action taken. Circle said what they did was it was kind of begrudgingly they did it, but again, no legal action. I didn't see things from Coinbase and Binance and all these other different groups, as well as Tornado Cash is a huge treasury. And so you would think that the Tornado Cash DAO would be launching a legal challenge against this. This would be the perfect thing to use the money for, but they have not done that. Maybe it will come. I think it's honestly surprising that there wasn't really quick action. You would expect there to be something. I have listened to the opinions of some people who are involved in kind of industry consortiums who are dealing with sort of lobbying efforts in Washington, and they're saying they're talking to the government to try and understand what was the decision, what was the reasoning behind it. Maybe they just don't understand the technology and didn't really understand what they're doing, etc. And where does this eventually go? We will see what happens, but I think that you will continue to see an escalation of this sort of thing. I don't think that you're going to be in a situation where governments just roll over to decentralized technology at all. It may push for more advancements in privacy-oriented technology. It may push for more advances in decentralized technology, because a bunch of these things, although they're on decentralized infrastructure, they're not very decentralized. For example, USDC is, of course, run by Circle. It's not decentralized at all. It's a U.S. public company. And you just have to kind of consider, Brian Armstrong, who's the CEO and founder of Coinbase, made kind of a series of comments about what he thought should be done and things like that. But he also said, obviously, they will comply with the law. And so, of course, this is going to happen, right? Of course, if you are the CEO of a public company in the U.S., you cannot do something illegal. You just can't do it, right? You can't say, oh, you know what, we believe in decentralization, we believe in whatever, we're just not going to do this. This will not happen. First of all, you have a fiduciary obligation to your shareholders, and so they can sue you and you can bring on all kinds of liability. In fact, they can remove you from power and whatever. And these shareholders are often pension funds and people who don't care about a decentralized, freedom-oriented ethos, so they will not back you up. There were some comments from Kevin O'Leary saying, he thought this was good. I'm not a huge Kevin O'Leary fan, but I gave some tweet about, Kevin O'Leary does not share the Web3 ethos. It doesn't matter how many crypto projects he supports or whether he goes to the Bitcoin conference or anything like this. The reality is he is an opportunist in it for money, which is fair. But you shouldn't view him as an ally, and this is a great example of that. So what is likely to happen? I mean, in my opinion, and I've been saying this for a year and a half or something, I think very clearly they will push for regulation on various different points. And the objective essentially will likely, once they figure it out enough, be to bifurcate the crypto world, to essentially have kind of like clean crypto and not clean crypto. And the clean crypto will exist within a KYC, AML compliant, custodial environment, right? It'll basically be like brokerage accounts, where if you're on an exchange, you can trade on an exchange. We have no problems with that. You can transfer from that exchange account to another exchange account. We have no problem with that. But money coming from outside, from the non-KYC, AML compliant area, that's a no-go. Now, where I think this could be a problem is very quickly you get kind of this taint that spreads really easily. And we saw this because one of the things that happened was people started sending Ethereum to all sorts of prominent wallet addresses from kind of like Tornado Cash corrupted addresses, and basically tainting the wallets of those different people. So now all of a sudden they could no longer engage because their wallet had received something from this Tornado Cash stuff. So it's very interesting how that plays out, and I don't know how you can control for that. I also think that given time, privacy technology makes it difficult to enforce this sort of thing. So I think there's a bit of a chicken or an egg kind of cat and mouse game being played here, and it will probably be played over the next decade. This is not a like short term, we'll see it next month or next year or whatever. I think this was kind of salvo one, and you'll see numerous salvos over the next few years, and you'll see numerous things arise kind of in opposition to that, and we'll see how it plays out. It is something that would encourage people to move overseas. So in other words, projects that are overseas, not under US jurisdiction, there's more stability there. Developers who are maybe wanting to be involved in these things will be more concerned about being in the US. They'll want to be overseas. So I think that this forces talent and wealth and project development outside of the US sphere and into other areas, and that'll be interesting. The reality, and one of the problems with this has always been that in an open architecture, open source environment, if they come and they say, oh, MetaMask is today going to add KYC, somebody's going to fork MetaMask in Africa and compete with them, and now where are you going to go to, right? So this sort of problem is something that I think is pretty difficult for them to cage in, and so we'll see, but I think they're going to try. So anyway, that would be my assessment. Curious to hear what you guys have to say, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.